housing. How do we protect one of the primary essentials of life? And, you know, it's basically about how the cost of housing has gone up, and that has provoked, that is the major driver of this nation's homelessness problem. Zillow published a study a year and a half ago or thereabouts, in which they really did a deep dive on this. And what they found was that when housing prices, or actually rent, they were looking at rent rates, rental rates, which reflect, you know, housing prices affect rent. That when rent was up above 32% of neighborhood income, take-home pay. When rents exceeded 32% of neighborhood income, actually it might have been gross, I don't know, homelessness begins to explode. And the relationship between the percentage increase in rent above 32% and the percentage of homeless as a percentage of the community is a linear relationship. It actually, these two things increase in parallel with each other consistently. And there are a lot of communities in America where, you know, this is the case. I tell the story in this article about how, you know, in 1956, I remember this because I was a little kid, it might have been 1957. I was 5 or 6 years old, and my dad bought a new house. He had, you know, we had lived in this little, basically one-room rental in downtown Lansing, in kind of a sketchy part of town. And I mean, we were genuinely poor. We were eating macaroni and cheese from the surplus store, and we did all our shopping at the Salvation Army, which I, to this day, still love. I mean, I didn't realize we were poor. But then my dad, and because he was making a living selling World Book encyclopedias and Rexair vacuum cleaners door to door, and that's a tough way to make a living. But when I was 5 or 6 years old, he got a job at Lansing Die Sinking, or Lansing Tool and Die, a tool and die shop, and joined the Machinists Union, and boom, suddenly we were in the middle class. And so in 56 or 57, Dad bought a new house in the south part of Lansing, a little 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom ranch house for $13,000. At the time, that was about twice what his income was. The $13,000 house, his income at that time was probably around $6,000 or $7,000 a year. Now, you know, we'd have to inflation adjust all those numbers, but here's the kicker. In the 1950s, according to the Federal Reserve, the average price of a single-family home was 2.2 times the national average for income. In 2021, the median price of the average home, $374,900, was 10 times average median income, which was $35,805. So we went from housing costing twice what your annual income is to housing costing 10 times what your annual income is. And, you know, the result of that is homelessness. People can't afford housing. The result of that is higher rents. People can't afford rent. Now, what has been driving this? It turns out that, you know, there's been a number of things driving this variable, but the biggest one is the financialization of housing. It's that Wall Street has jumped into the housing market, the single-family residential home housing market, with both feet in a big way. In some towns, they're buying pretty much, you know, every house that becomes available. And they're sitting on millions of empty homes, millions of overpriced homes. You know, they just buy them as investments. The other one, so that's Wall Street. Wall Street is driving most of this. The other thing that's driving some of this is foreign investment. You've got the Russian oligarchs with their ill-gotten gains laundering money through real estate. This is, you know, probably as much as half of Donald Trump's revenue since the 90s when his casinos went bankrupt and he had to declare bankruptcy 6 different times. What came out of that was, as Eric and Don had both said in public, that big Russian money came in. I mean, that one Russian oligarch in particular who bought an $11 million property for $54 million, if I'm remembering right. It's something like that in those kind of number areas. That was obviously just an attempt to give Donald some money. But, this is money laundering, big time. From that to just rich people looking for good investments. You've got a lot of Chinese billionaires who are buying property in the United States. They buy it up. They don't have any desire to even rent it out. We have millions of empty homes in America. In fact, there are more empty homes in America right now than there are homeless people in America. And virtually all of them are owned by either wealthy foreigners or Wall Street firms that are looking to make a buck and have said, housing in the United States is a great investment. Will Rogers was right. Buy land. They ain't making it anymore. And in fact, for 60%, excuse me, let me rephrase that. For middle-class people, 60% of their wealth, on average, is their home. And you can't build that 60% of your wealth if you're only renting. Every month, your money is going to pay somebody else's mortgage. So if you want to get into the middle class, kind of one of the preconditions, I can tell you, well over half of my personal wealth, mine and my wife's, is our home. I mean, this is how you do it. This is how most middle class people build their wealth, is by, just over time, you buy a more expensive house and a more expensive, you just kind of work your way up the housing market. And that's your investment. It's your best investment. But when housing costs are 10 times income, that locks an awful lot of people out of the housing market. And so now what we're seeing is more and more people are renting, and because they're renting, they don't have the ability to build that wealth. So how do we solve this problem? I don't get into that in great detail in my article today, and it probably should be the topic of a subsequent article. But there are a number of things that we can do to solve this problem. Number one, we could pass a law saying that there is a tax on empty houses. If a house is empty for more than 6 months, then there's a tax on that. This would probably be more functionally done at the state level, but it could be done at the federal level. Number two, although I think it would be a substantial bureaucratic burden. Number two, we could ban corporate and foreign purchases of more than a certain number of houses. Companies may not buy more than 5 houses. Foreigners may not buy more than 3, for example. Because right now you've got Chinese billionaires who own thousands of homes in the United States. Bill Gates owns millions of acres in the United States, including a lot of homes. Just, ban it or tax it. That's fine. You want to buy 3 houses, that's okay. You want to buy the 4th house, we're going to put a 10% surcharge on that. By the way, somebody called in the last hour, at the very end of the last hour, and said Massachusetts had passed a 10% or a 4% wealth tax. I looked it up because I was pretty sure that there are no wealth taxes in the United States, taxes on your actual wealth. They're calling it a wealth tax, but it's not. It's a 4% surcharge on people who make more than $1 million a year. So it's a tax on the wealthy. It's not a wealth tax. But anyhow, back to housing. So we could do it through tax policy. We could do it by basically outlawing empty houses. We could do it, one of the things that we did in the 60s and 70s was build more low-income housing. That prevented an awful lot of homelessness. But the bottom line is homelessness, I posted this on Twitter, on X, and, a couple of, Musk has tweaked the algorithm, so conservatives are getting my posts now, and it's just amazing the vitriol and the hate and the anger that I'm getting, particularly when I posted my piece on income taxes yesterday. They went nuts. It's funny to read, actually, if you read my feed. But, somebody posted this morning, said in response to it, well, who says people have a right to housing? What are you, some kind of communist? Well, you know, people being unhoused, people not having housing, doesn't just hurt them. It hurts society. It hurts all of us. It harms economic growth. It harms our social fabric. It's generally destructive right across the board. And this is a problem that we have in the United States right now and that we had in the United States in the early 1930s. And Franklin Roosevelt fixed it in the 1930s by putting people to work, giving them good jobs, and creating the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. But it's, you know, we've got a long way to go with this. And the situation is, you know, I would say dire. So let's get our act together here. Let's do something about housing. Particularly that Zillow study that noted, this is a quote from the Zillow study, across the country, the rent burden already exceeds the 32% of median income threshold in 100 of the 386 markets included in this analysis. Wow. That's why you've got homelessness.